Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is earthquakes in the Middle East. When you live in an earthquake zone, earthquakes are inevitable, so be prepared. If you are the leader of a country in an earthquake zone, institute and enforce building codes that will protect your citizens from those inevitable earthquakes. Not to do so is plain and simple political malpractice. In California, for instance, there are codes and inspections. They are essential. They save lives. In Israel, there are codes and inspections. And when people, builders and contractors, engineers, when they violate the building codes and cut corners, people die. Certainly, those responsible are held accountable. But that doesn't bring back the dead. Building responsibly does not mean that the earthquake won't result in destruction. It does not mean that people won't die, but it does mean that the numbers of the dead and the amount of damage sustained will be significantly reduced. And in the end, these measures save money and they save lives. To think otherwise, certainly to act otherwise, is truly to be penny wise and dime foolish. Turkey and Syria should have known better. Everyone, and I mean everyone, who lives in the region knows that they live in an earthquake zone. And not just any earthquake zone. Theirs is the largest seismological rift in the world. It runs nearly 4,500 miles. That's twice the distance from Manhattan to LA. The rift is for good reason known as the Great Rift. It is also called the Syrian-African Rift. To call it a rift, however, is a misnomer because it's actually a rift system composed of several joining rifts and faults. The rift starts in Southeast Africa in Mozambique and goes all the way to Turkey. It runs under the Red Sea, which explains why Egypt is the subject to so many earthquakes. A rift is created when there is a dip in the earth. A fault is a break in the surface of the earth. They're two different things, but very similar. In fact, the Dead Sea was created by the formation of this rift. The Syrian-African Rift is huge. The walls along the crack in the earth rise as high as 6,600 feet. The rift that created Lake Tanganyika, the world's largest or longest lake, 420 miles long, it's world's second deepest lake at 4,708 feet. By comparison, the world's largest freshwater lake, Lake Superior, is only 1,312 feet deep. That's a difference of 3,396 feet. The dimensions of the rift that also run through Turkey and Syria are outstanding. The Dead Sea sits in the rift itself. It is the lowest point in the earth for that very reason. The earth opened and this rift was created. The Dead Sea is 1,310 feet below sea level, and the sea is 1,300 feet deep. That makes the distance from sea bottom to sea level 2,600 feet. The Great Rift is composed of several rifts that intersect, as I mentioned. These breaks in the earth create wondrous natural habitats like rivers and lakes, hot springs and geysers, and even volcanoes. It is shifts inside the earth in this region that create the earthquakes. The tectonic plates move apart, and then, when they need to settle into place, a quake occurs. Aftershocks, which are sometimes even greater than the original quake, can continue for weeks afterwards. That is the earth settling back again, getting back to the new normal. This movement is significant. On one side of the Great Rift, the earth is moving northward. On the other side, the earth is sinking. Quakes have been around since biblical times. The psalmist writes of mountains skipping like rams and hills like lambs. This is a beautiful description of an earthquake. The prophet Amos, in the 8th century before the Common Era, dates events from the time of the earthquake. That makes sense. Everyone will remember the great earthquake. Its devastation lasts for generations. A huge earthquake is a perfect benchmark for dating events. And this earthquake of 2023 was huge. But it is important to note that earthquakes in this region are so common that as of this writing, in the past 24 hours, there were 3 earthquakes that have erupted. 53 in the past week, 320 in the past month. Most are small. Most are barely noticed. Most do not get the media coverage. Most do not cause destruction and death. This recent giant 7.8 magnitude on the Richter scale quake will be there to remind us for many years of huge destructive power that earthquakes command. But it doesn't have to be this destructive, this daily. Erzurum, a town located just next to the epicenter of the quake that devastated Turkey, the mayor of the town, Erzurum, this Turkish town, insisted that all buildings be built to sustain a quake. And in this devastating quake, not a single building collapsed and not a single person died. Let that be a lesson to all. Coming up next, Points of View. First up is a column from Ynet, and it was published on February 24th, and it was written by Smadar Perry. Smadar Perry is one of Yediot's expert commentators on the Arab world, primarily Arab politics and power. She has covered this beat for a very long time, certainly as long as I can possibly remember, and she's always insightful, even when I disagree with her. This column is entitled Israel Bracing for More Violence as Ramadan Nears. Subtitle, Analysis, with Palestinian and Israeli relations as strained as ever, all eyes are on the U.S.-mediated meeting in Jordan, which aims to have the two warring sides reach an understanding to avoid hitting the point of no return. Once again, the subtitle here is more of a tease. It synopsizes Perry's entire thesis. This is how Smadar Perry begins. With less than 4 weeks left until the holy month of Ramadan, preparations for the Muslim holiday in Israel are well underway, with officials extremely concerned that the recent violent spell will only exacerbate. As part of these preparations, senior officials from Jordan, Egypt, and the United States and Israel, and the Palestinian Authority were to meet Sunday in an attempt to prevent the tensions from reaching a tipping point. Perry sets the stage and gives her readers valuable insight, not just about the meeting, but also about what might happen. Still, the speed with which both sides approved the U.S. request was awfully surprising. In this process, it also became clear that the National Security Council Director Tzachi Hanegbi and Secretary General of the Executive Committee of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, Hussein Ashikh, have been in direct contact in recent weeks. The intention of the meeting is clear to all sides: to not let the violence reach the point of no return during Ramadan. This comes as the Palestinians are still reeling from an IDF raid in Nablus last week, in which 11 Palestinians, mostly militants, were killed. Israel and the Palestinians, as well as the mediators, fear that a further escalation could eventually turn into a third intifada. Now Perry describes an unspoken truth that no politician wants to hear, but we have to hear it, and she says very clearly that Abbas and his leadership do not and cannot control the PA. She writes, senior officials in Ramallah have admitted that the Palestinian security forces have no control in most areas in the West Bank. They say the ideological gap between the younger Palestinian generation and the elders is now too wide to bridge. Now Perry explains how dire the economic situation is in many parts of the Arab world, not just in the Palestinian Authority, and how the month of Ramadan is a critical part of daily life in that world. She continues, the Arab world really doesn't need a major flare-up to occur during Ramadan. It has enough troubles, most of them economic, which will become even more evident during the holy month. Egypt, for example, is now making major efforts to raise donations for Mawed el-Rahman, tables on which meals are placed in city centers for those in need, whose numbers have increased in the past year. In Jordan, the economic situation is quite bad as well. In fact, only the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia are in good economic shape. Every leader in the region knows that during Ramadan, people tend to eat more than usual and spend a lot of money on clothes and gifts if they can afford them. Now Perry concludes by explaining the situation in the Arab world does not seem to be changing. that Israel is still the main enemy and the main focal point of people's anger. She writes, but, as mentioned, this year's Ramadan will be a difficult one. If the International Monetary Fund and the United States and the EU don't provide a cash boost, it will be a sad, dangerous, and explosive month. It's still sad, however, that a mass prayer was held on Friday in a mosque in Jordan, not far from the Israeli embassy, in which calls were once again made to expel the Israeli ambassador, return the Jordanian ambassador from Tel Aviv, and scrap the peace treaty with the Jewish state. Next up is a column by Eddie Portnoy, and it's from the JTA, published on February 23rd, 2023. This column is a tribute to the very Jewish comedian and actor Richard Belzer. It's entitled, Richard Belzer was a Jewish comedian. Why didn't his obituary say so? Subtitled, Belzer did a routine about Bob Dylan's bar mitzvah, and he knew his fleishik from milchik. Portnoy wonders why no obituary of Belzer mentioned his Jewish side, which was, as anyone who ever saw any of his performances well knows, a component of his acting, his humor, and certainly his character. This is how Portnoy begins. Ever hear Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone sung in Yiddish dialect? It used to be a regular bit performed by comedian and actor Richard Belzer, who died this week at 78. He also used to do a routine with Bob Dylan's bar mitzvah, in which he recited a Hebrew prayer in the singer's distinctive tone. A similar Elvis bar mitzvah bit was also part of his routine. Surprisingly, Belzer performed these niche routines in numerous comedy venues, and even on nationally televised Late Show with David Letterman. In addition to a variety of other references embedded in his act, Belzer also performed Yiddish-inflected parodies of Prince's Let's Go Crazy and When Doves Cry. But like so many American comedians of Hebraic persuasion, Belzer didn't really work Jewish. The bulk of his act was general and observational. To be sure, there were bits and pieces of Jewish material that can be found scattered about his comedic oeuvre. Though, to have the broad appeal he achieved, he understood that he had to deal in comic generalities. But to have thrown bits like Dylan's bar mitzvah into routines for venues as broad as the Letterman show is an indication that he was truly dedicated to his Jewish material. Portnoy tries to explain Belzer's mystique by quoting David Letterman's band leader, Paul Shaffer, another identifiable and proud affiliated Jewish performer. He writes, moreover, according to Paul Shaffer, he was a proud one. I should also point out that I don't mean Jewish in the religious sense. Belzer, after all, appears to have been an atheist. So what is meant here is Jew as an ethnic category, one that apparently confounds a lot of people and which results in many Jewish artists being described as anything but Jewish. To call Burt Bacharach an American composer or Barbara Walters a pioneering women newscaster is accurate, but misses a significant ethno-cultural aspect of these people, one that was integrally responsible for making them who they are and influencing their creative choices. The notion that Jewish is something more than a religious denomination, that it's a wide-ranging culture that includes art, literature, music, food, folkways, and languages, is terribly difficult to grasp for some people. Portnoy concludes with a perfect tribute to Richard Belzer's Jewishness. This is what he writes. Paul Shaffer also recalled how Belzer once accompanied him to say Kaddish for Schaeffer's father at the Karlbach Shul on the Upper West Side. I didn't know what kind of Jewish education he had, Schaeffer told me, but the cat could daven, pray. Paul added that he and Belzer once bonded over old cassettes of the Friars Club's roasts. One of the tapes was a roast emceed by DJ and Sinatra expert William B. Williams, born Velvel Breitbard, who, whenever someone's joke bombed, would begin to utter the Jewish prayer for the dead, Yiskadal, Yiskadash, Shemei Rabbo, and get big laughs from the audience. Belzer loved it so much, he stole it and would recite the prayer on stage at subsequent roasts whenever a comic bombed, and even when his own jokes died. Yiskadal, Yiskadash, bells. You will be missed. The death of Richard Belzer is a big loss, especially for Jewish humor. I used to see Richard Belzer walking on the streets of the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I had not seen him in a few years, and I had a feeling that something was wrong. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 8 cartoons and memes and headlines today. The first are memes poking fun at the Chinese balloon. I found them both very funny. This will continue to be fodder for cartoonists for quite a while. Cartoonists just love the balloon. First meme is the Three Stooges looking for balloons. It could not be funnier than this. This next meme reads, "Balloon rides canceled until further notice." And then next up is a gun shop selling a trebuchet. The sign reads, "No background check for medieval artillery." For those who are not familiar with a trebuchet, it's like a large catapult or a giant slingshot. The trebuchet changed the nature of war. It could send the projectile a half a mile, and upon impact, it would break through the walls of the old cities. It was a massive change in warfare. I hope that you all enjoy the posts from friends and loved ones of food, especially baked goods they craft. Posting photos of your food art has become a huge phenomenon on the internet. This meme portrays a medieval pageant with cake and its centerpiece. The caption reads, "When you bake a fantastic cake but have nowhere to post it because the internet does not exist. That's funny." Now this next meme is of Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell is one of the great economists and economic thinkers of the past 50 years. He's a student of Milton Friedman in the Chicago School. His comments are brilliant, like this one. "It is usually futile to try to talk fact and analysis to people who are enjoying a sense of moral superiority in their ignorance." Brilliant. I experience this all the time, and at a certain point, I politely and simply keep quiet and just listen. Next up is a wonderful play on Zoom meetings. I cannot tell you how often this happens. It's a picture of a seance, and the caption reads, "Zoom meetings are just a modern seance." 4 participants are sitting around a seance table. The leader says, "There is someone who wants to join us." "Elizabeth, are you there? We can't hear you. Can you hear us?" That's exactly a Zoom meeting. These last 2 cartoons are about Ukraine and Putin. Putin is sitting in front of a cake with a single lit candle in the center. With him is his general. Putin is actually berating the general, saying, "I told you to take Kiev in 3 days." The general responds, "But you did not specify months and years." That's true. And now we see it 1 year later. This final cartoon has Zelensky holding a sword and cutting pencil strokes of Russian strings. The point of the cartoonist is that Ukraine is winning the PR campaign. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Officials from Israel, Jordan, Egypt, and the Palestinian Authority and the United States concluded their meeting in Jordan. Smadar Perry was writing about that. As we mentioned in one of our earlier columns, they had convened to reduce violence in the West Bank ahead of the Muslim month of Ramadan. The result of the meeting was that the delegates decided to form a security commission to discuss the renewal of cooperation between Israel and the Palestinian Authority on security. They also agreed to meet once more before Ramadan and form a joint civil commission to discuss confidence-building measures. Israel, for her part, made it clear that they have no intention of suspending the government's decision to legalize 9 outposts and construct 9,500 housing units in the West Bank. During that meeting that brought together Israeli-Palestinian security chiefs for the first time in many years, Jordan's King Abdullah told U.S. President Joe Biden's top Middle East advisor that efforts should be intensified to bring calm and reduce escalation in the Palestinian authorities. Brett McGurk attended the meeting in the Red Sea port of Aqaba, hosted by Jordan. This meeting was attended by representatives of key parties in the region, was a very important step towards helping to reduce tensions between Israelis and Palestinians. Israel's Ministerial Committee on Legislation voted to give government backing to a bill that institutes the death penalty for terrorists. Convened on the day during which another deadly attack on Israelis had taken place, the ministers decided that the State Security Cabinet will meet to discuss the text of the bill before it goes up for a Knesset vote. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the group and said, "We will act to deter terrorists and maintain security. We will strike terrorism with force." Israel's National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, added, "On this difficult day when 2 Israeli citizens were murdered, there is nothing more symbolic than passing the bill. It is a moral and fair bill." El Al, Israel Airlines Limited, announced that it has become the first Israeli national carrier to use a new corridor over Saudi Arabia and Oman. This flight path was made possible after Muscat joined Riyadh in allowing Israeli civilian overflights. As a result, when El Al Flight 083 departs Tel Aviv Ben Gurion Airport in the evening, it will take only around 8 hours to reach Bangkok, 2.5 hours less than previous trips. El Al CEO Dina Bental Ganasia spoke to the entire company when she said, "El Al is proud to be the first Israeli airline to fly over the skies of Saudi Arabia and Oman and to take an active part in the state of Israel's history." CIA Director William Burns said, while being interviewed by CBS TV, that Iran's uranium enrichment capacity has been steadily rising and will soon be able to reach a level of 90%. According to the CIA director, they've advanced very far to the point that it would only be a matter of weeks before they could enrich to 90%. If they chose to cross that line, and also in terms of their missile systems, their ability to deliver a nuclear weapon once they develop it has also been advancing as well. This is not good news. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has fired a senior military commander, a man who helped lead Ukraine's fight against the Russian troops in the country's embattled east. But the Ukrainian president gave no reason for his decision. In a one-line decree, Zelensky announced the dismissal of Edward Moskalev as commander of the joint forces of Ukraine, which are engaged in battles in the Donbas region. Zelensky mentioned Moskalev's firing in his daily address when listing the military commanders he had spoken to. Moskalev, whose name was glaringly missing from the list of military commanders, had been in the post since March 2022, shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine. Israel's Union for Social Workers announced that because of the finance ministry has not kept its commitment to devote 200 million Israeli shekels to reforming social workers' salaries, they will hold demonstrations throughout the country. If their demands are not met, the demonstrations will be followed by a general strike. The chairman of the Union of Social Workers, attorney Inbal Harmoni, said in a statement, "The finance ministry and the entire government of Israel negated the salary increase that was signed and agreed upon with us. In the coming days, we will disrupt all social services throughout the country until a complete shutdown is achieved and stage demonstrations throughout the country." Now, one has to recognize that social workers are an integral part of Israeli society. When they strike, countless Israelis suffer. An earthquake with a magnitude of 6.1 hit off the eastern part of Japan's northern island of Hokkaido. No tsunami warning was issued. The quake hit off Nemuru Peninsula at a depth of about 38 miles, according to the National Research Institute for Earth Science and Disaster Resilience. There were no immediate reports of injuries or damage. In 2 municipalities in Hokkaido, the quake registered lower, as low as 5 on Japan's 7-point intensity scale, which measures ground motion. According to Japan's meteorological agency, a lower 5 is usually a level during which items fall off the shelf and unsecured pieces of furniture start to move. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius reacted with skepticism to Chinese ceasefire proposals for the war in Ukraine. During an interview with German public broadcast Deutschlandfunk, the defense minister said, "When I hear reports, I don't know whether they are true, according to which China may be planning to supply kamikaze drones to Russia, while at the same time presenting a peace plan, then I suggest we judge China by its actions and not its words. Israeli security forces conducted a 2 million shekel drug bust on the Lebanese-Israeli border, according to the IDF spokesperson's unit. Following the identification of 2 suspects attempting to smuggle drugs into Israel from Lebanon through the Bedouin village of Arab el Aramasha, IDF combat officers, along with Israeli police, seized about 20 pounds of drugs worth approximately 2 million shekel. One of the subjects was detained and transferred to police custody for further investigation. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Earlier, I mentioned the death penalty, capital punishment. Did you know that there was and is a very long and great rabbinic discussion about capital punishment? It is truly too vast a discussion to completely go into here and now, but we can certainly focus on 1 or 2 interesting aspects of the discussion. There are in rabbinic literature 4 methods of execution in Jewish law. They are stoning, burning, strangling, and beheading. The rabbis in the Talmudic tractate of Sanhedrin go into great detail about each one of them. Stoning, for example, is not what you would think. It's not what is practiced in Iran, let's say, even today, where they bury a person in the sand to their head, and then where the head is visible, and then people cast stones at the head. The rabbis understood stoning as very different ideas, as throwing a convicted felon off a cliff onto a stone, and then dropping large rocks on him should he survive the fall. Burning is not burning at the stake, like in the early days of the United States with witches and others. Burning is understood by the rabbis as pouring molten lead down the throats of the convicted. They were burned from the inside, not the outside. I told you it would be interesting. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.